"Whatever you do, never step into that river before sunrise," the old woman had warned. But Abigail Brooks had always believed that fear grew faster than truth. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the towering pine trees, she quietly slipped away from the sleeping Omega village with a woven basket resting against her hip and a neatly folded change of clothes tucked inside. The hidden river deep within the northern forest had become her favorite sanctuary because no one else dared to go there. The villagers whispered that strange creatures guarded its waters, while hunters claimed enormous paw prints sometimes appeared along the muddy banks before mysteriously disappearing beneath the current. Abigail had heard every story since childhood, yet each one sounded more like a bedtime tale than a warning. To her, the river was simply peaceful. It was the only place where she could forget the judgment that often followed an Omega who preferred solitude over crowded gatherings. Morning mist floated gently above the calm water, turning the quiet valley into a dream painted in silver and pale blue. Birds had not yet begun their songs, and even the breeze seemed reluctant to disturb the perfect stillness. Abigail smiled softly as she placed her basket beneath the broad branches of an ancient willow tree. "See," she whispered to herself, "nothing is waiting for me except clean water." She removed her shoes and carefully stepped onto the smooth stones lining the riverbank. The water looked crystal clear, revealing colorful pebbles scattered across the shallow edge. She dipped one foot into the river and laughed quietly at the refreshing chill before taking a running step and diving gracefully into the water. Gentle ripples spread across the silent surface. For a brief moment, everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Then, nearly 20 feet below her, something moved. Hidden beneath layers of cool green water rested an enormous black wolf unlike anything Abigail could have imagined. His powerful body remained completely still among the smooth river stones, almost invisible beneath shifting currents and dancing reflections. His golden eyes slowly opened. The quiet splash above reached him long before he sensed her scent. He had entered the river hours earlier, seeking a rare moment of silence far from royal duties, hidden from advisors, guards, and a kingdom that demanded every waking breath from its alpha king. He had expected complete solitude. Instead, sunlight filtering through the water revealed the graceful figure of a young Omega drifting unknowingly above him. Abigail floated peacefully on her back, smiling at the brightening sky without realizing she was no longer alone. A faint current gently carried one of her silver hair ribbons deeper into the river. She reached toward it with an amused laugh, diving beneath the surface for only a moment before swimming back toward the shallows, never noticing the pair of golden eyes watching every movement with calm curiosity rather than hunger. The mysterious wolf did not swim closer. He did not frighten her away. He simply remained hidden beneath the water, studying the first person in many years who had entered his secret refuge without fear, pride, or expectation. Above the surface, Abigail climbed onto a sun-warmed rock, squeezing water from her long hair while humming a quiet melody to herself. Beneath that same rock, separated by only a few feet of flowing water, the Alpha King's wolf slowly rose from the riverbed, his dark silhouette barely visible before disappearing once more into the deeper current. Abigail gathered her things, completely unaware that the peaceful morning she believed she would soon forget had already changed two lives forever, because somewhere beneath the silent river, destiny had opened its eyes. Abigail Brooks told herself that the strange feeling would disappear once she returned to the village, yet the peaceful morning lingered in her thoughts long after the sun had climbed above the forest. As she walked home with her basket resting against her arm, she found herself glancing over her shoulder more than once. She could not explain why. Nothing had happened beside the river. No voice had called her name. No creature had revealed itself. Still, for one brief moment beneath the water, she had felt as though someone had been quietly watching her. By the time she reached the village, daily life quickly pulled her attention elsewhere. Children laughed as they chased one another between cottages. Neighbors swept their front porches, and fresh bread drifted through the cool morning air. Abigail smiled politely to everyone she passed, but her thoughts repeatedly wandered back to the silent river hidden beyond the pine trees. Later that afternoon, she carried a basket of herbs toward the village healer. An elderly woman sitting outside her cottage noticed the distant look in Abigail's eyes and smiled knowingly. You wandered into the northern forest again, did not you? Abigail paused before nodding. Only to the river. The woman's smile faded. Did you see anything unusual? Abigail hesitated. No, at least. I do not think so. She almost mentioned the strange feeling beneath the water, but decided against it. Even to her own ears it sounded foolish. The healer quietly placed another bundle of dried flowers into Abigail's basket before speaking in a softer voice. Sometimes the oldest places are alive in ways we cannot understand. Not every pair of eyes wishes us harm. Those words followed Abigail throughout the evening. As darkness settled over the village, she sat beside her bedroom window watching the moon rise above the forest. The river called to her thoughts with an irresistible calm that made very little sense. She should have forgotten about it. Instead, she found herself wondering what lay beneath those crystal-clear waters once the sunlight disappeared. Far away, hidden within the same forest, the enormous black wolf climbed silently from the river. Water streamed from his dark fur as he stepped onto the rocky bank with effortless grace. He paused only long enough to glance toward the path Abigail had taken that morning before disappearing between towering pine trees. Moments later, a soft silver glow surrounded him. The massive wolf gradually transformed into a tall man dressed in dark traveling clothes. Damien Ashford stood quietly beneath the trees, his golden eyes still fixed toward the distant village. He rarely remained in one place for long while wearing his wolf form. The river had always offered him solitude from endless royal responsibilities. Today, however, something unexpected had disturbed that carefully guarded peace. The image of the young Omega laughing beneath the morning sunlight refused to leave his thoughts. She had entered the forbidden river without fear, without greed, and without any idea that an Alpha King had been only a few feet away. Most people who learned his identity sought power, favor, or recognition. She had sought nothing except a peaceful morning. Damien quietly looked toward the bright moon hanging above the trees before turning deeper into the forest. He intended to leave before sunrise and return to the palace where countless duties were waiting for him. Yet as he walked away, he unexpectedly stopped. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of wild lavender from the direction of the river, the same fragrance that had surrounded Abigail earlier that morning. After several silent moments, Damien slowly changed direction. Instead of traveling south toward the capital, he found himself walking back toward the hidden river once again. At the same moment, Abigail stood beside her window looking toward the distant forest with a quiet smile she could not explain, unaware that while she wondered whether she had imagined those unseen eyes beneath the water, the mysterious wolf had already made a decision that neither of them would be able to escape. The next morning Abigail Brooks woke before sunrise with the quiet determination that only unanswered questions could create. She tried convincing herself to stay home, to finish the daily chores waiting outside her little cottage, but every attempt failed. The hidden river had settled into her thoughts like a melody she could not forget. After packing a small basket with fresh bread, a bottle of spring water, and a bundle of wild lavender she had gathered the evening before, she quietly slipped back into the northern forest. Golden rays filtered gently through towering pine branches, painting moving patterns across the narrow trail as birds welcomed the new day with cheerful songs. Everything looked exactly as it always had, yet Abigail sensed something had changed. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Every few steps she paused, listening to the soft rustle of leaves behind her. Each time she turned around, nothing stood there except silent trees and dancing sunlight. She smiled nervously. You really are letting old stories get into your head, she whispered to herself before continuing toward the river. Hidden several yards away, Damien Ashford moved silently through the forest in his enormous black wolf form. He remained downwind, careful not to reveal his scent, watching only long enough to ensure Abigail walked safely through the uneven woodland paths. He had spent the entire night telling himself he would return to the capital at first light. Instead, he had found himself waiting beside the same trail before dawn, unable to explain why the thought of leaving felt strangely impossible. Abigail finally reached the familiar riverbank and breathed a quiet sigh of relief. The water shimmered peacefully beneath the morning sun exactly as it had the day before. She sat beneath the ancient willow tree and opened her basket, breaking off a small piece of fresh bread before laughing softly at herself. I suppose I came here hoping to prove that yesterday was only my imagination. A gentle breeze carried her words across the water. Somewhere beyond the trees, Damien quietly lowered himself into the tall grass, his golden eyes never leaving her. Abigail wandered along the riverbank collecting smooth stones, occasionally tossing one into the gentle current simply to watch the circles spread across the water. Time seemed to slow around the hidden river, washing away every worry she carried from the village. Then a frightened cry echoed through the trees. Abigail immediately turned toward the sound. A young white-tailed fawn had become trapped between the fallen branches of an old cedar tree near the edge of the forest. Without hesitation, she hurried toward the frightened animal, kneeling beside it while speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "It is all right. I am not going to hurt you." The little fawn trembled but did not struggle as Abigail carefully lifted one heavy branch just enough for the animal to free its slender legs. The moment it escaped, the young deer paused only long enough to gently brush its nose against Abigail's hand before disappearing into the forest. Abigail smiled warmly as she watched it leave. She never noticed another pair of golden eyes observing the entire moment from the shadows. Damien remained perfectly still. He had expected courage when she entered the forbidden river alone. He had expected curiosity when she returned despite her unanswered fears. What he had not expected was effortless compassion shown without any audience, reward, or recognition. The quiet kindness she offered so naturally stirred something inside him that years of royal duty had nearly buried. As Abigail picked up her basket and prepared to walk home, she once again felt the unmistakable sensation that someone was nearby. This time she stopped instead of ignoring it. Slowly she turned toward a patch of dense pine trees. For only a heartbeat, she thought she saw two brilliant golden eyes watching her from between the shadows. Then they vanished. Abigail stood completely still, her heart beating just a little faster than before. "Who are you?" she whispered into the silent forest. No answer came. Only the soft breeze moved through the branches. Yet hidden beyond her sight, the Alpha King's wolf remained close enough to hear every word, silently realizing that staying away from the gentle Omega was becoming far more difficult than facing every responsibility waiting for him beyond the forest. Abigail Brooks tried to forget the pair of golden eyes she thought she had seen between the pine trees, but every quiet moment seemed to pull her thoughts back toward the hidden river. 3 days passed, and each morning she found another reason to return to the forest. Sometimes she gathered wild herbs. Sometimes she collected smooth stones from the riverbank. Other times she simply sat beneath the ancient willow tree with a book resting in her lap, reading only a few pages before becoming distracted by the peaceful silence surrounding her. The strange feeling of being watched never completely disappeared, yet it no longer frightened her. Instead, it became oddly comforting, as though an unseen guardian quietly followed every step she took. Damien Ashford never allowed himself to come too close. Remaining hidden among the towering pines, the great black wolf watched from a respectful distance, careful never to disturb the gentle routine Abigail had unknowingly created. Each day he told himself it would be the last. Each evening he turned toward the distant capital before stopping once again. The responsibilities of an Alpha King waited beyond the forest, yet the calm he found near the hidden river had become impossible to abandon. One cloudy afternoon, Abigail wandered farther into the woods than she ever had before while searching for a rare patch of blue woodland flowers. Thick moss covered the ground, and fallen branches hid beneath layers of colorful leaves left behind by autumn. She carefully stepped over an old tree root before hearing a sudden crack beneath her foot. The earth shifted slightly, and one side of the narrow trail began to crumble into a shallow rocky slope leading toward the river below. Abigail instinctively reached for the nearest branch, but it bent beneath her weight, causing her balance to slip even further. Before fear had time to settle inside her heart, a powerful black shape burst silently from the trees. The enormous wolf landed firmly between Abigail and the unstable edge, pressing his broad shoulder gently against her side just enough to steady her without knocking her over. Abigail instinctively placed one hand against the thick black fur to regain her balance. Within seconds the loose soil settled, and the dangerous footing stopped giving way. She stood completely still, breathing quickly while staring into the familiar golden eyes only a few inches away. The wolf did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply remained beside her until he was certain she was safe. Abigail slowly lowered her trembling hand, but hesitated before stepping away. "It really was you," she whispered almost breathlessly. The giant wolf blinked once, his calm expression revealing neither fear nor aggression. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath along with them. Abigail cautiously reached into the basket, still hanging from her shoulder, and removed the small piece of fresh bread she had packed for lunch. Feeling slightly embarrassed by her own idea, she smiled softly. "I do not know if wolves like bread," she admitted quietly, "but it is all I have." She gently placed the bread on a flat stone a few feet away before taking 2 careful steps backward. The wolf lowered his head, studying the simple offering without immediately touching it. Abigail laughed gently. "You are as cautious as I am." After another silent moment, she turned toward the path leading home. "Thank you," she said sincerely without looking back. "Whoever you are." She walked slowly through the trees until her footsteps disappeared into the distance. Only then did Damien step toward the small piece of bread resting on the stone. He looked in the direction Abigail had gone before quietly picking up the offering with surprising care. No one had ever approached the Alpha King with something so ordinary and expected absolutely nothing in return. Holding the simple gift gently between his teeth, the great black wolf disappeared into the forest, completely unaware that far beyond the northern mountains, dozens of royal guards had already begun searching every road, valley, and woodland for their missing Alpha King, bringing a destiny much larger than either he or Abigail could yet imagine ever closer to the peaceful river where everything had begun. The peaceful rhythm Abigail Brooks had come to treasure changed the very next morning. As she followed the familiar trail toward the hidden river, she noticed fresh hoofprints pressed deep into the damp earth. They were far too large to belong to anyone from her small village, and there were dozens of them. She crouched beside one print, gently tracing its outline with her fingertips before quietly looking deeper into the forest. The air itself seemed different. Birds that usually filled the trees with cheerful songs had grown strangely quiet, as though they too sensed unexpected visitors nearby. Abigail continued walking until the river came into view. The ancient willow tree still stretched gracefully across the bank, and the gentle current flowed as peacefully as ever, but the comforting feeling she had always found there had been replaced by an unfamiliar tension. She sat beneath the tree anyway, placing a fresh loaf of bread beside her basket without really knowing why. She smiled faintly. "In case you decide you like bread after all," she whispered toward the forest. Hidden among the towering pines, Damien Ashford watched her from the shadows. The enormous black wolf had returned before dawn, knowing that the royal search parties were drawing closer every hour. His loyal guards had followed every trail they could find, and eventually someone would discover this secluded place. He had planned to leave before they arrived. Instead, one final glimpse of the young Omega beside the river had become impossible to resist. Abigail remained by the water for nearly an hour, quietly reading while occasionally lifting her eyes toward the trees as though expecting her silent guardian to appear. Suddenly, the sharp sound of distant horses echoed across the valley. She quickly stood. Moments later, a group of armored riders emerged from the forest on the opposite side of the river. Their polished silver armor reflected the afternoon sunlight, and every rider carried the unmistakable bearing of highly trained royal soldiers. Abigail instinctively stepped backward, surprised to see strangers so deep inside the forbidden forest. The captain guided his horse toward the riverbank before climbing to the ground. His expression remained calm, but his eyes immediately began searching the surrounding woods with practiced precision. "Miss," he called politely, "have you happened to see an unusually large black wolf anywhere in this forest?" Abigail hesitated. Her thoughts immediately returned to the gentle creature that had steadied her only yesterday. She carefully chose her words. "I have seen signs that animals live here, but nothing dangerous." The captain studied her face for a moment before nodding respectfully. "If you encounter such a wolf, please keep your distance. We have searched for him across mountains, valleys, and rivers for many days." Abigail frowned with quiet concern. "Are you trying to hunt him?" The captain immediately shook his head. No. His voice softened noticeably. We are trying to bring him home. Before Abigail could ask another question, one of the younger guards pointed toward the muddy riverbank a short distance away. Fresh paw prints, enormous and unmistakable, led from the trees directly to the edge of the water before disappearing into the current. Every soldier immediately turned toward the river in complete silence. The captain slowly lowered his head, his expression changing from concern to unmistakable relief. He was here, he whispered almost to himself. Abigail looked from the giant paw prints to the calm water flowing quietly past them. The wolf had been there only moments earlier. Hidden beneath the river's shimmering surface, Damien remained perfectly still, concealed by the deeper current exactly as he had been on the morning Abigail first arrived. From below, he watched the reflection of the royal guards standing along the bank, knowing every one of them had sworn their lives to protect him. Yet when he lifted his gaze through the moving water, it was not the soldiers he searched for. His golden eyes found only Abigail, standing beneath the ancient willow tree with quiet worry written across her face. And for the first time since becoming Alpha King, returning to his kingdom no longer felt like the only path waiting before him. The captain remained motionless beside the river, his eyes fixed on the enormous paw prints disappearing beneath the crystal-clear water. Every royal guard instinctively lowered his head in silent respect rather than preparing for pursuit. Abigail Brooks watched the unusual scene with growing confusion. She had expected hunters if the wolf truly mattered to the kingdom, but these men behaved as though they had entered sacred ground. After several quiet moments, she finally gathered the courage to speak. Why would so many royal guards search for a single wolf? The captain slowly turned toward her, carefully weighing his answer. Because he is not simply a wolf. Abigail frowned slightly, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. Before the captain could continue, the calm river suddenly rippled. The gentle current that had flowed peacefully only seconds earlier seemed to pause as circles spread slowly across the water. Every guard immediately straightened. Several placed one hand over their hearts without saying a word. Abigail instinctively stepped backward, her eyes fixed on the center of the river. A massive black wolf gradually emerged from the clear water with quiet dignity. Sunlight shimmered across his dark fur as he climbed onto the smooth stones without the slightest hint of fear. He looked first toward Abigail, then calmly toward the soldiers waiting along the opposite bank. No one moved. The forest itself seemed to fall completely silent. Then a soft silver light surrounded the great wolf. Abigail stared in complete disbelief as the enormous form slowly changed before her eyes. The powerful animal stood taller and taller until the light faded, revealing a man with dark hair, calm golden eyes, and simple black traveling clothes still glistening with drops of river water. He carried himself with effortless confidence, yet there was remarkable gentleness in the way his gaze settled on Abigail. Before she could find a single word, every royal guard dropped to one knee at exactly the same moment. The captain lowered his head. "Your Majesty," he said with unmistakable respect, "the kingdom has been waiting for your return." Abigail felt the world around her become strangely distant. The quiet guardian who had watched over her from the forest accepted her simple gift of bread and saved her from the unstable trail was not an ordinary wolf. He was Damien Ashford, the Alpha King whose name every child had heard in stories growing up. Her eyes widened as memories rushed through her mind. The golden eyes beneath the river, the silent guardian in the trees, the calm presence that had followed her through the forest. It had always been him. Damien took several slow steps toward her instead of toward the waiting guards. His expression remained peaceful, almost apologetic. "I did not intend to deceive you," he said in a calm voice. "The river was the only place where I could forget the weight of a crown, if only for a little while." Abigail searched his face, trying to connect the gentle man standing before her with the powerful ruler she had imagined for years. They seemed like two entirely different people. "You protected me," she said softly. Damien gave a small nod. "Anyone worthy of kindness deserves protection." The simple answer touched her more deeply than any grand speech could have. Behind them, the captain quietly approached before stopping several feet away. "Your Majesty, the council is gathered at the palace. Every neighboring territory believes something terrible has happened. They have been waiting for your command." Damien remained silent for a long moment. His golden eyes met Abigail's once more before he slowly looked toward the distant mountains where his kingdom waited. The peaceful days beside the hidden river had finally come to an end, but as he prepared to leave, one truth had already become impossible to ignore. The place he had come seeking solitude had unexpectedly given him someone he could no longer imagine leaving behind. News of the Alpha King's return spread across the kingdom faster than the evening wind, but one detail remained known only to a handful of royal guards. Damien Ashford had not been found in a distant mountain fortress or on a battlefield. He had been standing beside a quiet river with an ordinary Omega whose greatest concern that morning had been whether a wild wolf liked fresh bread. Abigail Brooks watched silently as the royal guards prepared their horses. The peaceful forest that had become part of her daily life suddenly felt unfamiliar, filled with polished armor, respectful voices, and the weight of a kingdom she had never imagined touching her own life. She lowered her eyes, believing this unexpected chapter had already reached its end. An Alpha King belonged inside a palace surrounded by advisors and nobles. She belonged in a small village where no one expected anything extraordinary from her. Damien seemed to sense the thoughts she never spoke aloud. Before mounting his horse, he walked back toward the ancient willow tree where Abigail still stood holding her nearly forgotten basket. "Thank you," he said quietly. Abigail looked surprised. "For what?" A gentle smile appeared across his face. "For treating me like someone who needed kindness instead of someone who carried a crown." She could not find an answer. Every story she had ever heard described powerful rulers receiving expensive gifts, endless praise, and unquestioning obedience. Yet this man spoke with sincere gratitude about a simple loaf of bread and quiet conversations beneath a tree. The captain respectfully cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we should begin the journey before sunset." Damien nodded but did not immediately leave. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his traveling coat and removed a small silver pendant shaped like a flowing river. It carried no royal crest and no precious gemstone, only a smooth design polished by years of careful use. "Keep this," he said as he gently placed it into Abigail's hand. "If you ever need my help, show this to any royal guard, and they will bring you to me." Abigail stared at the simple pendant resting in her palm. "I cannot accept something so important." Damien quietly closed her fingers around it. "You already accepted something far more valuable." She looked at him with confusion. He smiled gently. "You reminded me who I was before the kingdom needed a king." Those words remained in Abigail's heart long after the royal riders disappeared beyond the trees. Days passed quietly, but life in her village no longer felt the same. Travelers passing through the marketplace spoke excitedly about the Alpha King's mysterious return and how the entire royal council had welcomed him home with a ceremony unlike any in recent memory. Others whispered about a remarkable change in the palace. They claimed the king smiled more often than before. They said he had begun visiting villages without announcing his arrival, listening to ordinary families instead of spending every hour inside marble halls. Abigail listened without saying a word. Each evening, she found herself holding the silver pendant while remembering the peaceful mornings beside the hidden river. Far away inside the royal palace, Damien attended meetings, signed decrees, and welcomed ambassadors exactly as duty required. Yet whenever the endless discussions became exhausting, his thoughts drifted toward the quiet Omega who had never bowed before knowing his title and whose gentle heart had asked only whether a lonely wolf needed food. One afternoon, while reviewing reports inside the royal council chamber, an elderly advisor carefully placed an ancient leather-bound record before the king. "Your Majesty," he said thoughtfully, "while organizing the royal archives, we discovered something unusual concerning the Northern River." Damien looked up with quiet curiosity. The advisor slowly opened the fragile pages, revealing a faded illustration that had remained untouched for generations. Damien's calm expression changed the instant he saw it. The drawing showed an ancient willow tree beside a winding river, and beneath it stood an Alpha King offering his hand to a young Omega, wearing a silver pendant identical to the one now resting around Abigail Brooks's neck. Damien Ashford remained alone in the royal archives long after the elderly advisor had quietly departed. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight as he carefully lifted the fragile record from the wooden table. The faded illustration looked impossible to ignore. Every detail matched the hidden place he had come to treasure. The ancient willow tree leaned over the same winding river. The surrounding cliffs rose in the same graceful curve. Even the smooth stones lining the water's edge had been drawn with remarkable care. His eyes moved beneath the illustration to the handwritten words preserved by generations of royal historians. The passage described an old belief shared by the earliest Alpha Kings. It spoke of a peaceful river where destiny revealed itself not through power, wealth, or noble blood, but through quiet acts of compassion freely given. According to the ancient record, the true queen of the Northern Kingdom would first meet the Alpha King when neither sought the other, and the bond between them would begin with kindness before either heart recognized its meaning. Damien slowly closed the book, remembering every small moment beside the river. Abigail had expected nothing from him. She had offered food to a lonely wolf, rescued a frightened fawn without hesitation, and thanked a stranger she believed would never answer. None of her actions had been performed to impress anyone. That simple truth carried greater weight than any royal ceremony he had ever attended. Several days later, a royal carriage quietly arrived outside Abigail Brooks's village. Curious neighbors gathered along the narrow road as 4 royal guards respectfully stepped aside to allow the elderly advisor to approach her cottage alone. Abigail opened the door with visible surprise. The advisor smiled warmly before offering a gentle bow. "Miss Brooks, His Majesty requests your presence at the royal palace." Abigail blinked in disbelief. There must be some mistake. The advisor shook his head kindly. "There is no mistake. The invitation comes directly from the Alpha King." Murmurs spread through the village almost immediately. People who had barely noticed Abigail only days before now stared with astonishment as she climbed into the waiting carriage. She held the familiar silver pendant tightly in her hand during the entire journey, wondering whether she truly belonged anywhere near a palace filled with nobles and royal traditions. By the following afternoon, the towering gates of the capital slowly opened before her. Marble fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun, colorful gardens stretched across the palace grounds, and elegant banners moved gently in the breeze. Everything felt larger than anything Abigail had ever imagined. As she entered the grand audience hall, dozens of nobles quietly turned to watch the young Omega from the small northern village. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to confusion. Damien stood at the far end of the hall, wearing formal royal attire for the first time since Abigail had met him. The crown resting upon his dark hair reminded everyone present that he ruled the entire kingdom, yet when his golden eyes met hers, the warm smile she remembered from the riverside returned immediately. He descended the marble steps instead of waiting for her to approach. The grand hall became completely silent. Standing before Abigail, Damien gently extended his hand exactly as the ancient illustration had shown centuries earlier. "Welcome," he said softly. "I wanted you to see the place I have been trying to protect." Abigail looked around the magnificent hall before smiling with quiet honesty. "It is beautiful," she answered, "but I still think the river is quieter." A few surprised nobles exchanged uncertain glances, wondering how anyone could speak so naturally to an Alpha King. Damien simply laughed, a genuine sound that echoed warmly through the chamber. The elderly advisor watched the moment unfold before lowering his eyes toward the ancient record resting beneath his arm. Every detail written by forgotten generations was unfolding before him, and as the palace doors slowly closed behind Abigail, many within the kingdom still believed they were witnessing an ordinary royal invitation, completely unaware that destiny itself had just stepped across the threshold. The weeks that followed changed the kingdom in quiet ways that no celebration alone could have accomplished. Abigail Brooks did not suddenly become someone different simply because she had crossed the palace gates. She still greeted servants with the same warm smile she had offered neighbors in her village. She still paused to help gardeners carry baskets of flowers through the palace grounds. Whenever royal children became lost in the enormous halls, they somehow always found Abigail sitting beside a sunny window, ready to guide them home with gentle patience. Little by little, even the most skeptical nobles began noticing that the atmosphere inside the palace had changed. People laughed more often, Formal meals felt less distant. Servants who had once lowered their eyes in silence now found themselves thanked for their work by the Alpha King himself. Damien Ashford had not become a different ruler. He had simply remembered the man he had been beside the hidden river. One bright spring morning, he invited Abigail to ride with him back to the northern forest. There were no royal banners, no grand procession, and no audience waiting to witness the journey. Only two horses followed the familiar trail until the ancient willow tree finally appeared beside the quiet river where everything had begun. The water shimmered beneath the afternoon sun exactly as it had on the morning Abigail had first laughed before diving into its peaceful current. She smiled as she stepped onto the smooth stones lining the shore. "It still feels the same," she whispered. Damien looked across the calm water before answering softly. "No, we are the ones who changed." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle flow of the river and the songs of birds drifting through the towering pines. After a few moments, Damien reached into his pocket and carefully removed the small piece of cloth that had once wrapped the simple loaf of bread Abigail had left for a lonely wolf. He had quietly kept it all this time as a reminder that the greatest gifts often carried the smallest price. Abigail laughed with surprise when she recognized it. "You saved that?" Damien smiled. "It reminded me that kindness given without expectation is the rarest treasure a king can receive." He gently took her hand, not as a ruler claiming authority, but as the quiet guardian who had once stood between her and an uncertain path. "Abigail Brooks, I found peace before I found destiny. Then I realized they were the same place because they both led me to you." Tears of quiet happiness filled her eyes. "And I thought I was only searching for a peaceful river." Damien laughed softly. "Perhaps the river was searching for both of us." Beneath the graceful branches of the ancient willow tree, with no witnesses except the forest that had guarded their secret from the beginning, Abigail accepted his hand. Months later, the kingdom celebrated not merely the union of an Alpha King and an Omega, but the beginning of a new chapter built upon compassion instead of pride. The ancient prophecy remained preserved inside the royal archives. Yet those who knew the complete story understood that destiny alone had never been enough. It had taken a young woman willing to offer bread to a lonely wolf, a king willing to protect without revealing his name, and countless small acts of kindness freely given before the future could unfold. From that day forward, travelers passing through the northern forest often paused beside the quiet river and noticed how peaceful the place felt. Parents told their children that the old willow tree had witnessed a love that began long before either heart understood its purpose. Some believed the river carried a special blessing. Others smiled and said the magic had never belonged to the water at all. It had always lived inside two people who chose gentleness over fear, humility over pride, and kindness over expectation, proving that true strength never demanded to be seen because it revealed itself naturally wherever love was brave enough to begin.